We'll use this as an opportunity to set up the 4 steps of recycling. The 4 steps are collecting, sorting, reprocessing, and resale. In other words, you have to go out and get stuff, you have to separate what you want from what you don't want. You have to put it back in some kind of reasonable condition, and then you have to turn it into an article that someone can buy. And the recycling process isn't complete until someone has bought that article back. Lots of places that I go and give this presentation, people will say, oh yes, I recycle. I have a blue bin and I put all of my stuff in the blue bin. And I say, well actually that's just throwing it away in a blue wastebasket. Because recycling is what happens after you put the blue bin out at the curb, and it's all the processes that take place after that. The first step is collection. And there are a number of ways in which materials can be collected. First is by deposits. This sort of started the modern history of plastics recycling. About 1978, 9 states had deposit law on drink containers that in those days consisted mostly of glass and aluminum and 2-liter soda bottles. Well, there wasn't much of an infrastructure for those 2-liter soda bottles, so instead of them piling up, a couple of enterprising companies said, you know, perhaps we can devise a process that would allow us to take this material and reprocess it. They were in the business of making polyester fiber. And the chemical that was the PET soda bottle is the same chemical as the polyester fiber. And it was from that, finding an inexpensive raw material to use in their process, that's where modern plastics recycling started. But it was all a matter of dealing with the deposit bottles that were coming back. There's another way in which you could collect things, and that's by a drop-off. Back in the 1980s, you would see in parks these green igloos where people would come and throw their bottles, and it might be for green glass and brown glass and clear glass. But the difficulty, of course, is once it goes in the igloo, you can't fix a mistake, especially if it goes crash when it hits the bottom. And so what you would have in the igloos at the end of the day is typically 3 igloos full of mixed color broken glass. So what would it mean if you had a bunch of mixed color broken glass at the bottom of the container? Well, it would mean that you really couldn't do much with it at all except maybe grind it up real fine and put it back on the beach. Because what people aren't really interested in is a greenish, brownish, bluish material to go back into glass. And that's kind of the problem with drop-offs, is that there's very little quality control, and as a result, particularly for things that are breakable like glass, you had very little opportunity afterwards to separate the materials out into various streams and extract the full value from them. So that's why we evolved into the next step, which is municipal collection, and that's where the blue bin that we've talked about before comes in. Now, there are some places that don't use a blue bin, they use a green bin or a yellow bin. I can tell you that if you know how to use a blue bin reasonably well, I can have you working smoothly in a green bin or a yellow bin literally within a couple of hours worth of instruction. So it's the sort of deal where you take your materials, set them out in at the curb, and a truck comes along and collects them. We have also the blue bag program. In a blue bag program, you take all of the recyclables, the paper, the plastics, and the glass, you put them in a blue plastic garbage bag, set them out at the curb, a regular packer truck comes along and picks up the bag, and then they go to a material recovery facility, or MRF, wherein the bags are dropped, they're split, the materials are sorted, and off they go. There are different kinds of collection in terms of the trucks as well. There are some trucks that have a number of bins on the side, and so someone jumps off the truck, picks the stuff up out of the blue bin, tosses it in the right container, and off they go. But more and more we're seeing automated collection.
Here's an example of automated curbside pickup in Albuquerque. The household puts all the recyclables into one container, and the truck comes by, grabs it, and dumps it into a commingled stream. The driver never even has to get out of the truck.
What it comes down to is for the soda bottles, the PET, about half comes from curbside and about 10% from drop-offs, and about 35% comes from some kind of deposit, whether it's a regular deposit or it's the California recovery value. For high-density polyethylene, like for milk bottles, about 73% comes from curbside, and most of the rest comes from drop-off. So by far, curbside is the largest single source for collection of materials. Well, now let's talk a little bit about that material recovery facility. And what you see on the slide in front of you is a scheme that's used in at least one MRF, wherein you imagine now that we have all this stuff that comes into the floor. The first step in the separation is to put all the stuff on this conveyor belt, and the first station on the line will be for the corrugated board, that is to say the cardboard and the boxes and so on. Because those things are big and bulky, they get pulled off first. Then what you have left is the other mixed paper and glass and containers. That material goes over a screen that allows the denser containers to fall through, and the things that are very large and not dense, like paper, to stay on top. So then the paper rides up on top onto a conveyor belt, where it is also hand-picked into a number of different kinds of grades. So after that, we're left with the containers. We have the plastic, the aluminum, the steel, and the glass. And those things are separated first by coming up to a plastic station where the plastics are pulled off. Those materials will then be baled and shipped to a specific facility where they will be sorted into the individual plastics. Once we've pulled off the plastic materials, then we're left with steel, aluminum, and glass. And the first thing we separate is the steel. With a regular magnet, a conveyor belt picks up the steel materials, pulls them off to the side, and those materials are separate. Now we're left with aluminum and glass. And the last step is to separate the aluminum from the glass by a device called an eddy current separator. This is also a type of magnetic separator, but in this particular case, it induces a field in the aluminum where the aluminum jumps off the belt into its own separation, and the glass turns the corner and is separated by color into clear and green and brown and perhaps other colors. So in following this stream, we've taken a mixed set of materials and turned them into relatively pure streams of different things that each can be sent off to their different processing facilities for further work.